Now that we have the official pricing and some key details of the new Perodua D55L SUV, the internet has sort of gone wild. There's a lot of discussions, or rather arguments, regarding Perodua D55L versus the Proton X50. That's to be expected, of course, but there are a lot of questions out there. Should you really compare these two models to each other? Are they even in the same class? Should you cancel the X50 booking for the Perodua? What is the deal here? The answer is really quite complicated, so let's talk about it. And by the way, the name has been confirmed as the Perodua Ativa. Check out more details on paultan.org. First of all, I do agree that this is not a fair apple-to-apple comparison. The price range is the most significant factor here. The Perodua is priced between 62,000 and 73,000 ringgit, while the Proton goes for 79 to over 100,000 ringgit. There's no overlap here, and crucially, the most expensive D55L is still significantly more affordable than the cheapest X50. So you might think that these cars have completely different target markets. No one is going to be cross-shopping between the two, so perhaps any comparisons are not relevant at all. But here I'd have to disagree. Of course, you should be comparing these two cars. Car buyers should be looking around in the market, see what's available, instead of just zeroing in on one brand and buying them straight. Yes, there's no overlap, but think about it. Say if you're a guy who's sitting on a booking of an X50 Standard, waiting for your allocation, and now there's a new option in the market. If you get the D55L AV instead, you can save some money, get better safety features, and yes, probably get the car earlier at this rate. Same goes for those who are looking at the X50 flagship solely because, your next car, die must have the ADAS features, for example. Now, there is a much cheaper option that meets your criteria. And it goes both ways too. Those considering the D55L should definitely go out and test drive the X50 too. Now, I haven't driven the new Perodua yet, but I think it's safe to assume the Proton will have a big advantage in terms of performance and, of course, ride and handling. Life isn't all about specs and numbers after all. The subjective things sometimes matter so much more. And if, like me, you are hooked on X50's likable looks and driving dynamics, you might want to spend that little bit extra to go for the Proton. My point is, it's always good to consider all your options, and comparing these two are 100% relevant. Now let's talk about the size difference, because this is pretty significant too. The D55L is clearly smaller than the X50, and even though it's marketed here as a compact B-segment SUV, in some markets the Daihatsu Rocky is even considered as an A-segment SUV. The Proton is a proper B-segment SUV. But at this point, do classes or segments even matter anymore? The Aros is technically a B-segment SUV too, but you wouldn't be comparing it to these two, right? Looking at dimensions, the X50 is over 300mm longer and 100mm wider than the D55L. The Proton also has a much longer wheelbase too, 75mm longer to be exact. That is a lot. But as usual, pure numbers don't always tell the whole story. My colleagues who have seen the Daihatsu Rocky all say it's pretty big inside. I haven't been in one myself, but I would guess that the Perodua SUV will be at least as spacious as the Proton X50 inside. We know for a fact the Rocky has a bigger boot than the Proton. It's a similar story if you look at the Perodua Asia and Proton Iris. The A-segment Asia is obviously smaller than the B-segment Iris, but it actually is the Asia that has the more spacious cabin and a bigger boot. Exterior size can be misleading. So what is my point then? Those of you who are completely dismissing any comparisons because the X50 is a lot bigger, because the D55L is too small, I don't think that's fair. There's a lot of people saying the D55L it's too small, must be cramped inside. No, that's not right. But I get it though, size does matter sometimes. The X50 does look a lot bigger on the outside, carrying more road presence and prestige. Yeah, I get that. It looks like the more expensive car, and of course it is. If that matters to you, sure, I can't argue with that. Just remember, always consider all your options. Next, let's move on to engines. Both models have a downsized 3-cylinder turbo engine. So all of you who questions Proton use of a 3-pot in the X50, now Perodua has joined the party too. But beyond having the same layout, the two engines are so different. The Perodua D55L gets a 1-litre turbo with a multi-point injection, and it's basically the same 1-litre engine already used in the Asia and Beza, just that it's turbocharged now. The Proton, meanwhile, has a bigger 1.5-litre turbo engine, and the flagship version has direct injection too. It's also clearly a far more modern, more advanced engine, seeing that it's shared with the Volvo XC40, following the premium brand's very high standards. That's clear to see by looking at the power outputs too. The Prodoa's 1-litre turbo makes 98 PS and 140 Nm of torque, compared to 177 PS and 255 Nm for the direct injection X50 flagship. So the Proton engine is 50% bigger but makes 80% more power and torque. At the same time though, you do have to consider the X50 weighs 400 kilograms or 40% more than the Perodua, so the D55L will have an edge in terms of fuel economy. Perodua claims a fuel consumption figure of 5.3 litres per 100 kilometers versus 6.4 litres for the X50. As for refinement and engine vibration, I sure hope the new SUV is a big improvement over the Azias and the Bezzas, because if not, it's going to be a massive advantage for the X50. The D55L also uses a CVT compared to the Proton's dual-clutch transmission, so the driving experience will be very, very different between the two. CVT is a thing that you either love or hate, so we'll see if Perodua CVT is any good. If it's anything like the ones in Toyotas, it will be about 1,000,000 times better than Proton's Punch CVTs. But still, I find it interesting that Perodua is adopting both a turbo engine and a CVT at the same time. Two things that Perodua fanboys have made fun of as being too expensive to maintain, and with the CVT not fun to drive. Well, at least they will still have the timing chain to shout about. Moving on to safety, Perodua has pulled an absolute stunner here with the D55L. Standard AEB on all models, motorcycle detection, adaptive cruise control, level 2 semi-autonomous driving. It's incredible that we can have all that for around 70,000 ringgit. I remember not too long ago that we called out Perodua for not having the basic safety systems like extra airbags and electronic stability control, and now they are setting new safety standards for the entire industry. Well done, Perodua. Well done indeed. The D55L safety features put the X50 to shame. Here we have AEB on all variants, while Proton insists on taking airbags out from the X50 standard. AEB is only available on the top spec X50 flagship at over 100,000 ringgit, which may have been fine a year or two ago, but now with the new Proto SUV and the new Nissan Almera, the game has moved on. The D55L will also have level 2 semi-autonomous driving features as well, matching the X50 but at a much lower entry price. The one thing Proton has over the Perodua is Auto Park Assist, which I've mentioned many times over, is not all that useful. If you can't really make simple parking maneuvers, might I suggest a simple app called Grab? The Daihatsu Rocky actually does have an auto park feature, but we're assuming Proto has skipped it since there are no mentions of it in the official details. But we could be wrong, we'll see. Now let's talk about rebadging for a minute. Both of these cars are basically rebadged versions of other cars. The Perodua is basically a Daihatsu Rocky, and the Proton X50 is basically a Geely Binyue. Before you cry foul saying the Malaysian car industry has regressed, both local car companies really have done quite a fair bit of work here. Perodua claims to have been involved in the design and development of the Daihatsu Rocky with 30 Perodua employees based in Japan. That's why it looks so much like the Myvi, because Perodua had a hand in designing it. As for the X50, Proton led the R&D work in converting it to right-hand drive, and the local engineers have completely transformed its right-hand handling to suit Malaysian roads better. I dare say the Proton X50 is now a much better car compared to the Geely Binyue because of it. And of course, yeah, they designed the front grille too, of course. So that's about it for this video then. A not so short discussion on comparing the Perodua D55L and the Proton X50. Long story short, these two are not really a natural rival to each other. It's not like how the Mercedes-Benz C-Class is a direct rival to the BMW 3 Series. Exactly same kind of car, bang on in terms of price, similar pricing, and so on. But that shouldn't stop you from comparing them anyway, because as I've explained, if you're looking to buy one of these models, you should at least consider the other one too. Having options is never a bad thing. At the same time, as online commenters or industry observers, you really should not force your own personal opinions on others. Just because you prefer one brand over the other doesn't mean others must agree with you. Different people have different tastes and preferences, guys. Me, most of you know I have a Proton X50 myself, and having looked at the specs, I think I would have at least considered the Perodua as an alternative. I'm not saying I would have bought the Pro Duo instead of Proton because I do love the way the Proton drives, but at least I would have given it a chance. Just keep an open mind, guys, and be nice to each other. Nobody likes extreme fanboys, so don't be one. Now, if you made it this far, thank you so much. Let me know what you think of this video and whether you agree or disagree with my views. Thanks again, and stay safe, everyone.